The advocate slid the photograph across the table to me, the way a man deals a card he thinks will win the hand. Warrant Officer Marr, you are the corps armorer at the Palace of Harrogate. You issue the rifles. You inspect them, you sign for them, you take them back at the end of every duty. Correct? Correct. Then explain to this tribunal what I am looking at. I looked at it properly, because a man who works with weapons learns to look at things properly or he stops working with weapons. It was a still frame lifted from a video, blown up until the grain of it stood out like sand. 2 pairs of hands on one rifle. One pair belonged to a big man in a gray hooded coat, fingers wrapped hard around the fore-end, knuckles gone pale with pull. The other pair was in white cotton gloves, and those hands were not pulling at all. The room waited. There were 40-odd people in it, press, corps officers, a row of clerks, and a woman at the back in a plain gray coat whom nobody had announced and everybody had noticed. I am looking, I said, at a man trying to take a rifle off a sentry of the King's Foot Guard. You are looking, said the advocate, at a soldier of the Crown seizing a member of the public. No, sir. I'm looking at a man's fingers on Crown property that he has no business touching, and at a pair of gloves that have not yet begun to answer him. Not yet. Not yet. In that frame, nothing has happened. Whatever you have come here to argue about happens after it. He smiled the smile they teach them. And in your professional opinion, you, the man who hands out these rifles, was my client, at any point during this incident, in danger of being killed. I have been asked worse questions by better men. I gave him the truth, which was the only thing I had brought with me. No, I said, your client was never in danger of being killed. Not for 1 second. That's the part you should be frightened of. It began on a Thursday in the 2nd week of the tourist season. And it began, as most things at Harrogate begin, with an ordinary line of men waiting for an ordinary table. The armory sits under the north wing, down 11 stone steps, and at 4 in the morning it smells of oil and cold iron and the tea I keep going from dark until dark. The arms table is chest high, scarred, older than my grandfather. The men come down in file, and one by one I put a rifle into their hands and they put their name on a line, and neither of us says much because there is nothing to say. It is the same ritual it has been for 200 years. It looks like nothing. It is not nothing. Once that rifle leaves my table, it belongs to the man carrying it, and everything that happens to it out there. Every crowd, every camera, every drunk, every fool happens because I put it in his hands. Lance Corporal Idris Crane came through at 4:40, the way he always did. 11th in the file, never first, never last. 6 foot, dark-eyed, a face like a closed door. He took his rifle, checked it in 3 movements, bolt, sights, sling, and looked at me for half a second the way he always did, which I had never been able to read. Marr, he said. Crane. That was our whole friendship in those days, 4 years of it. I could have told you his service number and his shoe size, and I could not have told you one true thing about him. He drank nothing. He played no cards. On his rest days he went out through the tradesman's arch with a paper parcel under his arm and came back at 9 at night with the parcel gone, and no man in the barrack block knew where. There was a rumor he had been an instructor somewhere. There was a rumor he had been broken from sergeant. There is always a rumor, and I have never known one worth the breath. The others called him the Post, because he was the man who could stand the longest without an eyelid moving, and because a post is a thing you tie a horse to and forget about. At 6 the sun came over the East Range, and the gates opened and the world came in. You have to understand what Harrogate is in season. The North Gate forecourt is a great stone apron with a low chain rail dividing the public from the sentry beats, and by 9 that apron holds 400 or 500 people. School parties, hawkers, guides shouting the same 3 facts in 9 languages, a man who plays a fiddle badly, phones held up in a hedge of little bright rectangles. And behind the chain, in the boxes and on the beats, My men, red wool, black bearskin, white gloves, rifles at the shoulder, walking a track worn into the stone by men who are all dead now. They are the most photographed soldiers on earth and the least understood. People come to Harrogate believing, in some soft part of themselves, that the guards are furniture, that the stillness means there is nobody home. Every season, without fail, somebody sets out to prove there is nobody home. That season it was Darrell Kine. I did not know his name that morning. I knew what I saw from the armory window, which is a slot at ground level at the west end of the forecourt, and which gives me a view of about 120 feet of cobble and the front third of number 4 post. I had a rifle apart on the bench and one eye on the window, because that is how I have spent 31 years. He was big, that was the first thing. Not tall wide, the way a man goes wide when he has carried other men's furniture for a living and then stopped. Gray hooded coat, hood down, hair cropped, 35 or thereabouts, with a way of walking that pushed a hole in a crowd. Beside him, a smaller, quicker man with a phone already up and gimbaled on a little handle, walking backwards, which told me everything I needed to know about the next 10 minutes. Nobody walks backwards through a crowd by accident. Nobody films the back of a man's head unless the front of it is about to do something. They came along the chain rail from the west, and they stopped, and the small one crouched to get the angle, and the big one turned and grinned at the lens, and I felt something old and unhappy turn over in my chest. Crane was on the beat. Number 4 post is 30 paces of stone from the box to the gate pier and 30 back, and he was midway, coming toward them, rifle at the slope, boots landing on the same 200 cobbles they land on 10,000 times a year. The big man leaned over the chain and said something. I could not hear it. I did not have to. I have heard it all through that window. Are you real? Say something. Smile then. What are you going to do about it? It's not even loaded, is it? It's a prop, isn't it? Toy soldier. Crane went past him at the same speed he had come. That is the drill, and the drill is not cowardice, and this is the thing the public has never once understood. A sentry is not a policeman. He does not debate. He does not defend his honor. He holds a post, and every second he spends on you is a second he is not spending on the gate behind him, which is what he is actually there for. So he walks. He turns at the pier. He walks back. The big man followed along the chain, and his voice came up until I could hear the shape of it, and the crowd began to thicken around him the way it does, because a crowd is a stupid animal and it smells a show. It went on for 11 minutes. I know it was 11 because I looked at the wall clock when it started and I looked again when it finished, which is a habit, and which turned out to matter more than anything else I did that year. At minute 4 he flicked a coin at Crane's boot. It rang on the cobble and rolled, and a woman picked it up and handed it back to him, and he took it without looking at her. At minute 6 he stood square in the middle of the beat on his side of the chain and did an impression, rigid, chin out, eyes crossed, marching stiff-legged. There is a laugh a crowd makes at that, and I have grown to hate it more than shouting. At minute 8 he began to talk about the rifle. That is the point where my hands stopped moving on the bench. Not every fool graduates to the rifle. Most of them come to shout at a man's face, because the face is what they are angry at, the face that will not give them what every other face gives them. But a certain kind of man works his way down the body to the weapon, and once his eyes are on the weapon, you are no longer dealing with a nuisance. He was saying, is it real? Is it real though? Go on, show us it's real. And then he was saying it to the camera instead of to Crane, which is worse, because now it was a promise he had made to an audience, and men like that would rather die than be seen to climb down. Crane turned at the pier and came back, and did not vary his pace by a hair. At minute 10, Darrell Kine said the sentence that would, in the end, put him where he is now. He said it clearly, holding his cousin's lens with his eyes, in the voice of a man opening a shop. Right, he said, everybody watch, I'm going to take his gun. And the crowd laughed, and 100 phones went up, and he stepped over the chain. 11 minutes. And I want to say something plainly here, because in the months that came after, a great many people who were not in that forecourt explained at length what should have been done. From the armory window to number 4 post is about 120 feet, and I am a 58-year-old man with a bad knee, and there is a locked door and 11 stone steps between me and the cobbles. The nearest police officer was at the visitor screen, 60 yards off, with his back to us, dealing with a lost handbag. The corporal of the guard was inside the gate arch and could not see the west end of the beat at all. There was nobody. There was never going to be anybody. That is not a failure of the palace. It is simply the truth of a public place. Between the moment a man's hand closes on a sentry's rifle and the moment help arrives, there is only the sentry and whatever is in him. I remember exactly what I thought, standing at that window with an oiled rag in my fist. I thought, he is going to lose the rifle. He did not lose the rifle. Here is what happened, and I am going to tell it slowly, because it did not happen slowly, and the whole quarrel of the year that followed came down to what people thought they saw in a second and a tenth of a second. Kine came over the chain and took 2 steps and reached with both hands for the fore-end of the rifle, which was at the slope on Crane's left shoulder. A long, beautiful, awkward thing, made for a parade and not for a brawl, and the single worst object in the world to have in your hands when a big man decides to take it off you. He got a grip. I want that understood, because Kine's people spent a great deal of money later trying to say he never touched it, and then when that failed, that he touched it in play. He got a proper grip. Both hands high on the fore-end, and he set his feet and he pulled back and down, which is what they all do, because the human animal believes that the way to take a thing off a man is to be heavier and angrier than he is. And Crane went with him. That is the part nobody could see, and the part every expert in the realm ended up arguing about. He did not brace. He did not haul back. If he had, and I have seen good men do it, I have seen young men do it, and I will tell you what it costs. If he had hauled back, the 2 of them would have become a scrum, and a scrum around a rifle in a crowd of 400 is the beginning of a disaster. The muzzle swings. It swings across faces. And when 2 men are hanging off one weapon, nobody on earth knows where it is pointing, including the man who owns it. Crane stepped in. He turned his hips into Kine and let the pull carry the butt around, and as it came he rolled his wrist so the muzzle rode up and out over the empty air above the gate pier, not toward the crowd, not toward the chain, not toward the screaming schoolgirls 12 feet away, but out over stone and sky, where a rifle can point all day and hurt nothing. The whole movement was small. It looked like a shrug. It was not a shrug. It was the difference between an incident and a catastrophe, and it cost him about 3/10 of a second. Then he took the weapon back. He trapped Kine's right hand flat against the fore-end with his own gloved left, so the man was suddenly not gripping the rifle but pinned to it. He drove his forearm down along the barrel and rotated. That is a lever. It is a very old, very unkind lever, and it works on the thumb, which is the weakest thing a strong man owns. Kine's arm turned over because his arm had no choice, and his shoulder followed his arm, and his knees followed his shoulder, and he went down onto the cobbles on one knee with his own hand still trapped and his face suddenly, hugely surprised. Crane stripped the hand off, peeled it the way you peel a strip of tape, brought the rifle back through a short arc into the port position across his chest, muzzle up, the whole weapon home and locked against his body where 2 men could not have moved it. And he stepped back 1 pace, and put his boot exactly where it had been on his beat, and he said the only words he said in the whole affair. "Stand back from the sentry." That was all, not shouted, delivered the way a man says a thing he has said in his head 1,000 times. 1 second and 1/10. We know that now, from a source I will come to, and we know it to the frame. In 1 second and 1/10 of a second, a rifle was seized, controlled, levered, stripped, and returned to the port position, and a man who weighed 16 stone was on his knee on the cobblestones, and nothing else in that forecourt had changed at all. The crowd did not understand what they had seen. That is the honest truth of it, and it is the root of everything that came after. 400 people had watched a big man swagger over a chain, and then there had been a blur, and now the big man was kneeling and the guardsman was standing exactly where he had been standing, chin level, eyes forward, rifle at the port, as though the last 2 seconds had been a trick of the light. There was a strange, thin noise from them, not a cheer, something more like the noise a room makes when a glass falls and does not break. Then the police came at a run, the man from the visitor screen and 2 more from the arch, and the corporal of the guard with his face the color of paper, and Darrell Kine was still on his knee holding his right hand against his stomach, and he was screaming. He was screaming that his hand was broken. He was screaming that he had been attacked. And his cousin, the small quick man with the gimbal, was walking a slow circle around the whole scene with the lens up, filming, and behind him 400 phones were doing the same. And I was still standing at my window with my rag in my fist, and I understood, with a cold and complete certainty that has never once left me since, that the worst thing about that morning was not that a man had grabbed a rifle. The worst thing was that he had been filmed doing it, and that the film did not start where I would have started it. They took Kine away in a police van at 10 past 11. He went noisily. He wanted the crowd to see him go, and the crowd saw him go, and a good number of them were already sending what they had filmed to people who were not there. Crane finished his duty. I want that on the record too, because it was thrown at him afterwards as evidence of coldness, and I have never heard a stupider argument. He was on until noon, so he stood until noon. He walked his 30 paces up and his 30 paces back, past the place where the coin had rung on the stone and the place where a man had knelt, with 400 people now watching him the way you watch a lit fuse, and he did not vary his pace by a hair. At 12 he was relieved. At 1:30 he came down my 11 steps with his rifle, and he laid it on the arms table, and I looked at it, and I looked at him. There was a smear on the fore-end where a big damp hand had been, and a scuff on the butt plate. Nothing else. The weapon was as I had given it to him. "Crane," I said. "Mar," he said. He signed the line. His hand was perfectly steady, which I noticed, and which I later came to understand was not the reassuring detail I took it for at the time. Then he stood there half a second longer than the ritual requires, that same half second he always gave me, the one I had never been able to read, and this once, he said something more. "Was there a camera on the beat this morning?" "Number 4, there's the pier camera, covers the arch." "Does it cover the beat?" "The west end of it, some." He nodded slowly. He looked at the rifle on my table for a moment, the way a man looks at a dog that has bitten someone. "Then it'll be all right," he said, and went up the steps. And I stood there in the smell of oil and cold iron, and thought that of all the things that man might have said after a morning like that one, he had chosen to ask about a camera, and I did not know why, and it would be 5 weeks before I did. The video went out that afternoon, and it was not the video I had watched. It was 91 seconds long, and it was titled Royal Guard, SNAPSON, Unarmed Man, *, and it had been cut by somebody who understood exactly what he was doing. It opened on a wide, wobbly shot of the forecourt, pleasant, sunny tourists. Then a hard cut, and now we are close, and a big man in a gray coat is standing near the chain rail with his hands loosely at his sides, saying nothing, because the audio has been dropped out, and a bright little strip of music laid under it. And then a soldier in a red tunic comes at him fast, and there is a whirl of red and gray and black, and the big man is on the cobbles howling with his hand clutched to his belly, while the soldier stands over him with a rifle across his chest. That was it, that was the whole thing. The 11 minutes were gone, the taunting was gone, the coin was gone, the stiff-legged mockery was gone. And above all, The 8 words Darrell Kine had said out loud to his cousin's lens, right, everybody watch. I'm going to take his gun, were gone, cut clean out, because the clip did not begin until his hands were already moving and his mouth was already shut. The grab itself was in it, but it had been slowed and then it had been sped up, and at the speed they ran it a viewer saw only a red blur and a falling man, and every single human being who watched it on a small screen with the sound down read it in exactly the way it had been built to be read. The statue snapped, and it broke a man in half. By the evening it had 2 million views. By the following night, 11. There was a still frame of Crane's face, taken from the one instant in which a man performing a hard physical action looks, unavoidably, like a man performing a hard physical action. And that frame was on the front of 2 papers and the top of every feed in the realm, and under it in enormous letters. Who is the man behind the mask? There is a thing that happens to a country when it decides to have an argument, and the argument is never about what it is about. By the Saturday, it was not about a man who had put both hands on a sentry's weapon in a crowd of 400 people. It was about soldiers, and the palace, and whether a fellow could go and look at the guards on a nice day without being. The word was everywhere for a month, brutalized asterisk. A pundit whose name I refuse to write said, on a program watched by 5 million people, that these men are given rifles and no words, and it is time we asked whether that is a soldier at all or simply an attack dog in a nice coat. And on the Sunday, Darrell Kine's face was on a screen in a hospital gown he had no earthly need to be wearing, with his right hand in a sling and his voice unsteady, saying that he was a father, that he had been having a laugh, that he had never touched the weapon, and that he had thought when the soldier came at him that he was going to die. His hand in the event was a dislocated thumb, which the hospital had put back the same afternoon. That is what 1 second and 1/10 of a second of Idris Crane cost a 16-stone man who came over a chain to take a rifle off him. A thumb put back before supper. I have thought about that number for a long time now. I have handed rifles across that table for 31 years, and I have seen what happens when the drill goes wrong. The thumb is the whole argument. The thumb is the sermon. Nobody wanted the sermon. They wanted the blur. On the Monday, they took him off the wall. The order came down from the corps staff, and it was dressed the way those orders always are, in the language of protecting the man himself. Lance Corporal I. Crane, pending the outcome of an internal review and any subsequent proceedings, was withdrawn from public ceremonial duties and reassigned to administrative support in the armory, Harrogate. Administrative support in the armory means me. So for 6 weeks that winter I had him, 11 stone steps down, at a bench under a barred window, cleaning weapons he was not permitted to carry. I will not pretend I was gentle with him at first. I was angry, in the low way a man my age gets angry, and I was angry at him because he was the one in the room. My armory was full of young men with white faces who had begun, I could see it in their hands at the arms table in the morning, to wonder what they were supposed to do if it happened to them. That is the thing the country never understood about that clip. It did not shame Idris Crane. He was made of something the shame could not get a purchase on. It went and sat instead in the hands of 19-year-olds. I said as much to him, on about the 4th day, with a rifle in bits between us. They're frightened, I said. The young ones. Pretty dropped his rifle at the table this morning, dropped it. He's never dropped anything in his life. Crane went on with what he was doing, which was running a pull-through down a barrel with the patience of a man threading a needle in a storm. He's frightened because he doesn't know what he's allowed to do, he said. That's not fear of the man. That's fear of the paperwork. And what is he allowed to do? Exactly what I did. That's not what the whole realm thinks. No, Crane agreed. But the whole realm won't be standing on number 4 when the next one comes over the chain. He set the rifle down and looked up at me, and for the first time in 4 years I saw something behind the closed door of that face, and it was not anger. It was something much more patient and much more frightening. "There will be a next one, Mar," he said. "That's all this is, a cue." The lawyer's letter arrived at the palace 3 weeks after the grab, and it was a piece of work. Advocate Sylvain Orr was the sort of man who buys advertisements on the sides of buses. He was acting for Kine, and the letter announced a civil claim against the Crown for injury, humiliation, and I remember the phrase because it was read aloud to me twice: the negligent deployment of a lethally trained individual in a civilian environment *. He was seeking damages, an apology, and the removal of the individual concerned from any post at which he may come into contact with members of the public. It was a shakedown, and everybody knew it was a shakedown, and it was also very well aimed, because Orr had understood something about the palace that I had not. The palace does not like noise. Colonel Ivo Breakwell came down to the armory himself, which colonels do not do. He was staff, not line. He had a good tunic and a good voice, and he had, I am sure, been very brave somewhere once, before he learned that the true enemy of a career is a headline. He sent me out of my own armory to talk to Crane, and I stood in the corridor and heard about a third of it, and I got the rest from Crane afterwards, in pieces, over a fortnight, the way you get water out of a stone. What Breakwell offered was this: there would be no tribunal, no court, no 6 weeks of the realm's press camped at the North Gate. Kine's claim would be settled quietly, with no admission of liability by the Crown. All that was required was a short, regretful statement from the individual concerned. Not an apology, Breakwell was careful to say. Merely an acknowledgement. A form of words already drafted, in fact, by people whose whole profession is the drafting of forms of words. The form of words was that the level of physical contact employed on the day exceeded what was strictly required. Sign that, and Lance Corporal Crane would take a reprimand, spend a year off public duties, and then, with the thing forgotten, as everything is forgotten, go quietly back to the wall. Refuse it, and the Crown would have no choice but to let the whole business go to a public tribunal of inquiry, in which case the Corps could not protect him, and he would stand up in front of the realm alone. Crane refused it in about 4 seconds. Breakwell came out through my armory on his way to the steps with his face set. He stopped at my table, because he wanted, I think, to say something to somebody, and I was the only somebody there. "He is going to be destroyed," the colonel said. "You understand that. He is going to be taken apart in public by a man who does this for a living, over a form of words that means nothing." "It doesn't mean nothing, sir," I said. He looked at me the way staff officers look at warrant officers when they suspect they are about to be told something. "Enlighten me." "That form of words says the drill is too much, sir. That's all it says. It says a sentry who takes his rifle back the way he was taught to take it back has gone too far." I put my hands flat on the arms table, on the wood where 200 years of them have put their hands. "So you'd have a paper, signed by the Crown, saying that. And in a year or 2 years, some lad of 19 on the Southgate has a man's hands on his fore-end, and for a quarter of a second, a quarter, sir, that's all it takes, he thinks about that paper." Breakwell stood very still. "And then," he said, "and then he hesitates, and then he doesn't get his rifle back, and then there is a loaded weapon loose in a crowd of 400 people, and none of us can put it back in the bag." I shrugged. "The Lance Corporal isn't being stubborn, sir. He's doing arithmetic." The colonel went up my 11 steps without another word. And I stood there, rather astonished at myself, and behind me at the bench Idris Crane said, without looking up, "That's the longest speech I've ever heard you make." "It's the longest speech I've ever made." He said, and then after a while, "You've got the shape of it right, but you've got the reason wrong." "Have I?" You think I won't sign it because of what it does to the next man, isn't it?" He held a bolt up to the barred window, turning it in the gray light, and he said something that I did not understand at all for another month, and that I have never forgotten since. "It's because of what it does to the last one," he said. Here is the part I did not know then. It is the part almost nobody knew, and it explains everything, and it starts 19 years before Darrell Kine ever put his hands on a rifle. There was a guardsman called Ewart Finn. He was 20 years old, and he was on a hospital cordon, a state visit, a foreign delegation, a long, boring day of standing in a corridor at the Royal Infirmary while important people said important things at each other in a ward 2 floors up. And a man came at him, not a professional, just a wretched, wild, disintegrating man whose wife had died in that building the week before, and who had decided, in whatever weather was going on inside him, that the way to make the world listen was to take a soldier's rifle. He got it. That is the whole horror of it, and every man in the Corps of my generation knows it, and nobody talks about it. He got both hands on it, and Ewart Finn did what the drill of that time told him to do, which was to hold on and shout for help. So they wrestled. 2 men on 1 rifle in a corridor full of nurses and porters and patients on trolleys, for the inquiry established this precisely, 19 seconds. 19 seconds, with a loaded service weapon swinging between them like the boom of a badly handled boat, and the muzzle crossing, in that time, the bodies of at least 14 living people. Nobody was shot. Nobody was shot because the safety was on, and because God, that day, was paying attention. 3 other men arrived and pulled the wretch off, and the weapon was recovered, and the official finding was that the sentry had acted in accordance with his training. Which was, of course, the finding that damned everything. Because the training was garbage. The old retention drill was 2 paragraphs long, and it amounted to hang on and shout, and it had been written by men who had never seriously imagined that a member of the public would lay hands on a rifle at all. The inquiry into the infirmary incident said so, in language so dry it could have started a fire, and then it did what inquiries do. It recommended that the matter be reviewed by a working group. The working group met for 2 years. And the corporal who ended up doing the actual work of it, the corporal who spent those 2 years in an empty drill hall with a succession of large volunteers and a wooden rifle, being grabbed 10,000 times, from every angle a man can be grabbed from, until he had built a sequence that a frightened 19-year-old could learn in a fortnight and perform in under 2 seconds without ever once letting a muzzle cross a living soul. That corporal's name was Idris Crane. He wrote the 9 count. Every sentry in the realm learns it. I have watched it taught in that hall 100 times. 9 movements drilled until they are not movements at all but a single reflex. Turn in, ride the muzzle out, trap the hand, lever the thumb, strip, recover, port, step, challenge. The manual is a slim green book called * Weapon Retention, Static Ceremonial Posts *, and on its title page where the author's name goes it says only this: prepared by the Weapons Retention Working Group. No name. He asked for it that way. I know now that he insisted on it over the objections of 2 generals, and I know why, and the why is the whole of the man. And when it was written and taught and folded into the training of every guardsman in the kingdom of Eldermore, Corporal Idris Crane, who could have had the school, the rank, the desk, the quiet, respectable end of a career, went to his commanding officer and asked to be reduced to a lance corporal and returned to the wall as a plain sentry on a public post. Nobody could make sense of it. They tried to talk him out of it for a year. He gave them one reason, and he gave it once, and it went into his file, which is where I eventually read it. A drill written by a man who no longer stands a post is only a theory. Someone has to be the first man it is used on for real. It should be me. I found all that out because of a paper parcel. It was the 5th week, and it was a rest day, and I had spent it in the armory as I always do, because I am a widower and the armory is warm. And at 8 in the morning Idris Crane went out through the tradesman's arch with a parcel under his arm, and I, 58 years old, with a bad knee, in a civilian coat, with no more business doing it than I have flying, followed him. I am not proud of it. I told myself it was because the press were still camped at the gates, and a man in his position should not be walking about alone. That was a lie, and I knew it was a lie by the 2nd Street. He took a tram east, and then he walked. Out past the goods yards, past the long brown canal, into the sort of streets where the palace is a thing on a coin. And he stopped at a low gray terraced house with a ramp instead of a step, and he knocked, and a woman opened it, and her face when she saw him was the face people make when the good part of the week arrives. He was in there 4 hours. I sat on a bollard by the canal like an old fool and waited, and when he came out the parcel was gone and he had a shopping list in his hand. And he saw me, of course he saw me. He had probably seen me at the tram stop, and he came and stood in front of me and looked out at the water for a while. "Ewart Finn," he said at last. That was his house. He has a wheelchair now, nothing to do with the infirmary. It's an illness. It took 12 years to take his legs, and it will take the rest of him eventually. His wife is called Nessa. He was a guardsman. He lost a rifle to a man in a hospital corridor 19 years ago, and no one died, and it ruined his life anyway. I said nothing. There was nothing to say. He was 20, Crane said. He wasn't a coward and he wasn't slow. He did exactly what he had been taught to do, and what he had been taught to do was worthless, and he has spent 19 years believing that the fault was in him. He turned and looked at me. It wasn't. It was in the paper. Somebody had to fix the paper. So you fixed the paper. I fixed the paper. And then you went back to the wall. Yes. Why? I said, truthfully, because you could have had the school. And Idris Crane, standing by a brown canal in a bad coat, said, because on the day it happened to Ewart, there was no one on that post but Ewart. Whoever writes the drill ought to have stood where he stood with what he had, and be prepared to be the one it happens to. Otherwise you're only a man selling advice. He put his hands in his pockets. So I asked to be the first, and it took 19 years, and last month a man came over a chain at the north gate, and it was. The canal went by. A gull argued with another gull. It worked, I said. It worked, he agreed. 1 second and 1/10, under the standard. No shot fired, no one else touched, the muzzle never crossed a living soul. He said it flatly, like a man reading a stock return. And now the realm is going to put it in a courtroom and ask whether it was too much. They'd have preferred 19 seconds and a wrestling match. They'd have preferred, said Crane, not to have to look. Then he told me, because he seemed to have decided, that day in that street, that I was going to be told about the 2 years in the drill hall, and the wooden rifle, and the 10,000 grabs, and the green book with no name on the title page. And I understood at last what he had meant in the armory, and it went through me like a spike. It's because of what it does to the last one. If he signed Breakwell's form of words, if he stood up and said the 9 count had gone too far, then Ewart Finn, in his chair in his gray house by the canal, would have been told by the Crown, 19 years late, that the thing which had finally been built to redeem his worst day was itself a mistake, that there had never been an answer, that the fault, after all, had been in him. He'd never say a word about it, Crane said. He'd shake my hand and give me tea. That's what's unbearable. We took the tram back together. Neither of us said anything for the whole of it, and I have never in my life been so glad of another man's silence. The internal review became a formal tribunal of inquiry on the 1st of the month, and the palace announced it would sit in public, because by then there was no version of it that could sit anywhere else. 6 days of hearings, counsel for the family, counsel for the corps, a bench of 3, chaired by a retired judge with a face like a closed ledger. And the corps, being an army, did what an army does when the world is coming. it started producing paperwork. I was ordered to prepare a full evidential file from the armory, the arms issue register, the inspection log, the maintenance card of the weapon in question, the ammunition state, the whole grim mountain of it, and to certify each page. It took me 11 days. And on the 9th of those days, with a mug of cold tea at my elbow and the wall clock ticking, I found the thing that changed everything, and I found it entirely by accident, because it was not even in my file. It was in the wrong file. The clerk upstairs, being an idiot, had sent me down the gate registers for the whole quarter instead of the arms registers, and rather than send them back up 11 stone steps I had begun, out of pure habit, to leaf through them. The gate registers record every vehicle that enters palace ground, what it is, who booked it, who signed the pass in and out. Kettleyard is our service gate, round on the east side, out of sight of the tourists, where the vans come, the laundry, the kitchen suppliers, the fuel, my ammunition, the furniture restorers. And on the morning of the grab, this is what the Kettleyard register said. 1036 Teal & Sons Restorations, Panel Van Gray, Book 1040 Collection Estate Stores, Pass Authorized A. Wicklow Stores, entered Forecourt Lane, held at Inner Barrier. 1112 Teal & Sons Restorations, departed, no goods loaded. I looked at that for a long time. A van comes to a royal service gate to collect something. It arrives 4 minutes early. It is held at the Inner Barrier, that is routine. You wait for the store's man to come down with the docket, and then it sits there for 36 minutes, and then it leaves with an empty back. 36 minutes. Nobody in the history of goods vehicles has ever waited 36 minutes at a barrier and then driven away without complaining to somebody. And no restorer takes a slot at a palace and then declines to take the goods. 1036. Kine came over the chain at 11 o'clock. I sat in my armory with the register open and my heart going like a young man's, and I made myself do the boring thing, because the boring thing is the only thing that has ever worked in my life. I went and found A. Wicklow. Amyas Wicklow was a store's clerk, 40 years in, dull as ditchwater, honest as a plank. He was in the estate offices with a bad cold. "That morning," he said, "I wasn't here that morning, I was in Torville, my daughter had her first. I was on leave the whole of that fortnight, it's in the book. Your name's on a gate pass for the 11th. He looked at me over his handkerchief with watering eyes. "Then it isn't my name," he said, "is it?" That was the midpoint of the thing, though I did not use such a word at the time. Up until that morning, we had been fighting a lawsuit. From that morning, we were looking at something else entirely, and I had no idea yet how much bigger it was than us. I did the next boring thing. I went and looked at Darrell Kine. Not at the man, at the work. His channel was still up, because it was making a great deal of money by then, and there were 40-odd other films on it, and I sat in a public library for 2 days with a young librarian's patient help and watched every one of them. He was a stunt man. That was the trade. He walked up to people who were not permitted to react, security men, ushers, museum attendants, a doorman at a bank, and he made them react, and he sold the something they finally did. But 3 of those 40 films were different, and I only saw it because I have spent 31 years looking at logbooks. In the 8 weeks before Harrogate, Darrell Kine had performed his little routine at 3 other places: the Royal Mews at Cardenholt, the Crown Archive at Vell Street, the Winter Palace at Ashenford, at the Tradesman's Arch. 3 properties of the Crown, 3 separate stunts, each drawing a crowd, each pulling every guard and every officer within 100 yards toward the noise. And each one I checked, and it took me a week of telephone calls and a great deal of pleading with clerks who did not want to be helpful. Each one had happened between 10 and 11 in the morning, in a book delivery window, at a building whose service entrance was on the opposite side from the noise. At the Royal Mews, a set of 18th-century carriage lamps had gone missing from the store that month, At the Crown Archive, nothing had been reported. At Ashenford, 4 gilt-framed mirrors and a pair of ormolu candlesticks had been logged as removed for restoration, on the authority of a pass signed by a store's clerk who, when I finally reached him at his sister's house, told me he had been in hospital having a hip replaced. I sat in that library, with my hands flat on a scarred wooden table, in the exact posture I take at the arms table, and I understood. Darrell Kine was not a fool with a camera. Darrell Kine was a noise. Somebody paid him to be a noise in the front of a building, while a gray van with a forged pass took things out of the back. And on the 11th, at the Palace of Harrogate, at 11 o'clock in the morning, that noise had put both hands on the rifle of the one man in the kingdom of Eldermore who could take it back in 1 second and 1/10 without shouting, without falling, without firing, and without ever letting the muzzle cross a living soul. There had been no scrum, no wrestling, no 30 seconds of 2 men rolling on the cobbles with a weapon between them, no screaming stampede, no whistles, no cascading alarm, no general lockdown, no gates flung open for ambulances and armed men running through them in all directions. There had been 40 seconds of quiet, and then a police van. The chaos never came. And so the gray van at Kettleyard sat at the inner barrier for 36 minutes waiting for a chaos that never came, and then it drove away empty, because the diversion it had been sold had been extinguished in 1 second and 1/10 by a man who does not make scenes. Idris Crane had defeated a robbery he did not know was happening. He had defeated it by being boring asterisk, and for that, the realm had spent 5 weeks calling him an animal. I went out of that library into the cold, and I stood in the street and I laughed until people looked at me. I was still laughing, more or less, when I laid it all in front of the Crown's advocate 3 days later, and she took it apart in about 9 minutes. Usylt Farrow was a small, tidy, terrifying woman of about 50 who had been briefed to represent the core interest before the tribunal, and who had the gift, rare, and worth more than charm, of telling you the truth at the speed you could bear it. She read my file, all of it. The gate register, the forged pass, Wicklow's leave book, the 3 properties, the delivery windows, the carriage lamps, the mirrors, the candlesticks, the hip replacement. Then she put it down and said, "This is very good work, Mr. Marr, and it will not save him." "It's a conspiracy," I said. "It's plain." "It is a pattern," she said. "A pattern is not a proof, and in any case it is not what the tribunal is about." She turned her chair to face me, and she was kind about it, which somehow made it worse. "The tribunal has one question in front of it. Was the force used by Lance Corporal Crane on the 11th proportionate? That is all. It does not care why Mr. Kine came over that chain, and or will simply say that even if there were a robbery, the Lance Corporal knew nothing of it, so it cannot justify what he did." She tapped the file. "Motive is a different courtroom. This belongs to the police, and I will make sure they have it today. But it will not stop Advocate Orr from taking your man apart on Tuesday week." "Then what will?" "The video," she said. "Only the video, not the cut. The whole thing from the 11 minutes to the arrest, at full speed and true speed, so that the bench can see with their own eyes that 8 words were said, a chain was crossed, a weapon was seized, and a soldier recovered it in less time than it takes to sneeze." She almost smiled. "Nothing else in this world will do, which is why I have spent this morning on the telephone with the Palace Security Office, and why I am now going to tell you something you will not enjoy." I knew before she said it. There is a particular gray feeling that comes just ahead of that kind of sentence. "The pier camera at number 4 post," said Usylt Farrow, "recorded that morning. It recorded all of it. And its file was destroyed 6 days ago in a routine 90-day purge." The armory clock in my head stopped. "That's not possible. There's a preservation flag." "There is. It is applied automatically to any incident logged under one of 4 headings: injury to a member of the household, damage to crown property, discharge of a weapon, or breach of the perimeter." She let that sit. Nobody was injured, nothing was damaged, nothing was fired. Nobody got through the gate. Because he stopped it. Because he stopped it, she agreed. And because he stopped it so completely that the incident was written up by a duty officer as public order minor. No further action at post asterisk, and the flag was never applied. And 90 days later the system did what the system does. I sat down on a chair I had not asked for. The palace had erased the proof of his innocence, because his innocence had been so thorough that it left no mark. He had done it perfectly, and the reward for perfection was that there was no wreckage, and with no wreckage there was no record. If he had struggled for 19 seconds like poor Ewart Finn, if the crowd had stampeded, if a woman had been knocked down, if the muzzle had swung across a schoolgirl and a whistle had gone and the gates had come down, the file would have been sealed in an evidence vault within the hour, and the whole realm would have seen it. So what is left, I said. What is left, said Pharaoh, is 91 seconds cut by the assailant's cousin and a witness box. Breakwell came down the 11 steps on the Thursday. He did not send me out this time. He stood in my armory with his hat under his arm, and he put the paper on the arms table, on my table, on the wood, and he laid a pen on top of it. Friday noon, he said. After that, council tell me the offer cannot be revived. Sign it and you are a lance corporal with a reprimand and a boring year. Don't sign it, and on Tuesday a professional will take your life apart in front of the realm in 90-minute sessions with a break for lunch. He was not sneering. He looked ill. I am not your enemy, Crane. I am telling you what a fight without evidence looks like. Crane was at the far bench with a barrel in his hands, and he did not put it down. How many guardsmen are on public posts in the realm today, sir? Breakwell blinked. 600 and some. 640. Every one of them was taught the 9 count. Every one of them is standing out there right now believing that if a man's hands go on his rifle, he may do a specific set of 9 things and be backed for it. He set the barrel down, carefully, and turned round. If I sign that, the Crown has stated in writing that those 9 things are excessive. Whatever the lawyers say it means, that is what it will mean at 4 in the morning to a 19-year-old at an arms table. Nobody will ever read it. Ewart Finn will read it, Crane said. Breakwell did not know who Ewart Finn was. That was the whole tragedy of Colonel Ivo Breakwell in one line, and I watched it go past him like a train through a station. He waited a moment longer, then he took up his hat. Noon on Friday, he said, and went. The paper stayed on my arms table all Thursday night. Neither of us touched it. I could not stop looking at it. I have had my hands on that table every working day for 31 years, and I have never wanted to burn it before. I want to tell you that I sat up all night and had a great insight, and that would be a lie. What I did was fall asleep in my chair at midnight with my head full of numbers, and wake up at 3:10 in the cold with my mouth dry and think about ammunition. I had had a delivery in the autumn, 2 pallets. And there had been a discrepancy in the count, some clerical nonsense, 40 rounds unaccounted, and it had taken us 3 days to run it down, and in the end the way we ran it down was this. We sat in the estate security office and we watched the film of the van being unloaded at Kettle Yard, and we counted the boxes as they came off, 1, 2, 3, and there was the missing carton behind the driver's seat, and everybody went home. I sat straight up in that chair. The goods in cameras. The forecourt cameras are security cameras, and security footage is kept 90 days. But the goods in cameras at the service gates are not security cameras at all, not in the eyes of the people who write the rules. They are *audit* cameras. They exist because the Crown buys 11 million crowns worth of provisions and fuel and furnishings a year, and every carton of it must be accounted for to the Treasury. An audit footage, by the standing order that governs the estate stores, an order I have complained about for a decade, because it fills the servers and slows my requisitions, is retained for *12 months*. I was up the 11 steps and across the frozen forecourt in my shirt at 3:20 in the morning, and the duty man at the security office thought I had lost my mind, and I very nearly had. "Kettle Yard," I said. "Camera 2, the 11th. "There's nothing at Kettle Yard, Mr. Marr. The incident was at the North Gate." "Camera 2, I said, faces up the delivery lane, and the delivery lane runs west. And at the end of the delivery lane, 300 feet away, is the arch of the North Gate." He looked at me. Then he sat down and started typing. The file came up. "Camera 2, Kettle Yard Service Gate, the 11th, 1000 hours to 1200 hours. 120 minutes of a gray van sitting at an inner barrier, and beyond it, small, distant, but perfectly, unarguably in frame, a slice of the North Gate forecourt, the chain rail, the cobbles, and 30 paces of number 4 post. Wide lens, enormous depth of field, cheap and honest and pointed at a wall and utterly indifferent to anybody's argument." We watched it in silence, that man and I, at 3:30 in the morning, huddled at a screen in a room that smelled of instant coffee. At 10:36, a gray panel van comes to the inner barrier and stops. The driver does not get out. At 10:49, far away at the end of the lane, a wide man in a gray coat and a smaller man with a phone appear at the chain rail, and a crowd begins to gather around them like iron filings. At 11:0004, the wide man steps over the chain. At 11:0007, he has both hands on a rifle. At 11:0008, and I made the duty man run it 4 times, and then I made him run it frame by frame, and I put my face so close to the screen that my breath fogged it. At 11:0008, a small red figure 300 feet from the lens turns his hips, and the muzzle of the rifle comes up and out over the empty stone of the gate pier, away from every living creature in that forecourt, and stays there. At 11:0009, the wide man is on one knee. At 11:0010, the red figure is standing exactly where he was standing, rifle at the port, and the crowd around him has not even finished turning its heads. 1 second and 1/10, time-stamped, continuous, unedited, uncut. From 10:49 to 11:04, every taunt, every step, the coin, the crossing of the chain, the grab, the recovery, the arrest. And in the same frame, in the same picture, 12 inches lower on the screen and 300 feet nearer the lens, a gray van from Teal & Sons, Restorations, sitting at an inner barrier with its engine running. At 11:12, it pulls away with nothing in the back. The duty man leaned back in his chair and rubbed his face with both hands. "Mr. Marr," he said, "what in the name of the crown am I looking at?" "You're looking at both halves of it," I said, "in one picture. I got Ursula Farrow out of her bed at 4:20. At 11 o'clock that morning, 1 hour before Colonel Breakwell's deadline, I walked down my own 11 steps into my own armory, and I picked up the paper off the arms table, and Idris Crane looked up from his bench. "Anything?" he said. It was the closest thing to hope I ever heard out of him. I tore it in half and then in half again, and I dropped it in the swarf bin under the vise, where the metal filings go. "Tuesday," I said. "Where your medals?" The Tribunal of Inquiry into the Use of Force at the North Gate sat in the great hall of the old Sessions House, which is a cold and beautiful room with a domed ceiling that turns every cough into an event. There were 3 on the bench. There was Advocate Sylvain Orr for the Kine family, in a coat that cost more than my pension, and Ursula Farrow for the Crown, with 2 box files and a face like a shut drawer. There were 60 of the press and a gallery, and along one wall a rank of corps officers in blue patrol dress with Colonel Ivo Breakwell at the end of it, looking as though he had eaten something. And in the 3rd row of the public gallery, in a plain gray coat, with no announcement, no chamberlain, and one very quiet man beside her, sat Princess Adela, the king's sister, colonel-in-chief of the corps for 22 years, who had never in her life been known to attend anything she was not obliged to attend, and who sat through all 4 days of it with her hands folded and said nothing whatever. Idris Crane sat where he was put, in his blues with his medals on, and his back did not touch the chair for 4 days. They called me on the first morning. That is where this account began, the photograph, the 2 pairs of hands, the question about whether his client had been in danger of being killed. Or wanted the armorer first because the armorer is a small, gray, technical man, and he thought he would get from me a picture of a corps that arms bored young men and lets them loose among tourists. He got 40 minutes of a 58-year-old warrant officer explaining, in a domed room with wonderful acoustics, precisely what a service rifle does to a crowd of 400 people if it is dropped, taken, or discharged, and precisely what I have to sign every morning of my life before a man carries one out of my armory. He stopped asking me questions rather sooner than he had planned to. Then he called Darrell Kine, and for a day and a half he was, I will admit, magnificent. Kine came into the box with his hands strapped, 5 months after a dislocated thumb was reduced in an afternoon, and he was gentle and rueful and frightened and very good. He had plainly been coached by somebody who knew how to build a man for a room. He said that he had gone to the palace to make a bit of a laugh, a bit of content, that's all it is. That he had never intended any harm, that he could not now remember touching the rifle at all, and that what he remembered was a red blur coming at him and a pain in his arm, and thinking, with absolute clarity, this man is going to kill me. And Orr, standing at the front of that hall, ran the 91-second clip on the great screen twice and let it hang there. You could feel the room take it. I watched 2 of the 3 on the bench watch that blur. Whatever they had read, whatever they knew, they were human beings, and they had just seen a big man standing peaceably, and then a soldier coming at him like a thrown axe. That, said Orr, is what the realm has seen 11 million times. He sat down. Pharaoh rose. She did not go near the screen. Mr. Kine, she said, how long would you say does that clip last? I don't, a minute and a half, something like. 91 seconds. And how long were you at the North Gate before the events in it? A few minutes. A few minutes. Might have been, I wasn't clock watching. No, she agreed pleasantly, you were not, and she sat down. That was the whole cross-examination on the first day. 6 questions. Orr looked delighted. He should have been terrified. She called Captain Rensallo on the Wednesday morning. Captain Sallow runs the Corps Weapons School at Bramhall. She is a soldier of about 40 who speaks the way an engineer speaks, and she had brought with her a wooden training rifle, a slim green book, and a technician with a laptop. Orr objected to her before she had opened her mouth. He said the tribunal did not need an expert to tell it what everybody could see with their own eyes on the film. Pharaoh said, my learned friend is right. The tribunal does not need an expert to tell it what it can see on his film. It needs an expert to tell it what it can see on mine asterisk. And she gave the technician a nod, and the great screen went dark, and up came a wide, grainy, sunlit picture of a delivery lane at the Kettle Yard service gate, with a gray van at an inner barrier, and far away up the lane, a slice of the North Gate forecourt. The clock in the corner of the picture said 10:49:12. I have been in rooms where something changed. I have never been in a room where I could hear it happen. Pharaoh let it run, all of it. She did not cut a frame. For 15 minutes that hall watched in real time at true speed. A big man in a gray coat walk up and down a chain rail with a crowd building around him, while a small red figure walked 30 paces and turned and walked 30 paces back, and did not stop, and did not turn his head, and did not answer him. The coin, the stiff-legged march, the laugh. 15 minutes is a very long time in a silent room. It is an eternity. It is, in fact, precisely 11 minutes longer than Advocate Orr's client had told them it was. And at 11:00:04 on a screen 30 feet wide, Darrell Kynes stepped over the chain. And at 11:00:07 both his hands closed on the rifle. Orr was on his feet. He said something about provenance and continuity and the Crown's late disclosure. The chairman of the bench, without looking at him, said, "Sit down, Mr. Orr. We will hear you at the adjournment." And Sylvain Orr sat down, and I do not believe he stood up with any conviction again. Then Captain Sallow took the room through 1 second and 1/10 of a second, frame by frame, for 2 hours. The technician put a red line on the screen. It did not point at anybody or anything. It was drawn along the axis of the barrel and extended, and it tracked with the weapon frame by frame, and it was called, in the language of the weapons school, the muzzle trace. It is the line down which a bullet would travel if a bullet traveled. It is the only line that matters. "Frame 1, said Sallow. "The seizure. Both of the assailant's hands are on the fore-end. The weapon is at the slope. The muzzle trace is vertical. It points at the sky. This is safe. It is also, from the sentry's point of view, the worst possible position in which to lose a weapon, because he has no leverage and the assailant has all of it. Frame 4. The assailant applies his pull rearward and downward, which is what an untrained man always does. Note what is happening to the muzzle trace. It is coming down. It is coming down through the vertical, and it is beginning to sweep west, across the chain rail, across the crowd. The line on the screen tilted. It swung. It began, unmistakably, to lie down across a mass of small, distant human beings. At the rate of travel in frames 4 and 5, said Captain Sallow, and had the sentry done what my learned friend has today twice described as the reasonable thing, that is, held on and pulled back, the muzzle trace would have crossed the bodies of, by our count, between 50 and 90 members of the public within 2 seconds, and would have continued to cross them, back and forth, for the entire duration of the struggle. Somebody in the gallery said something out loud. The chairman did not even reprove them. Frame 6, said Sallow. The sentry steps in asterisk. The line stopped tilting. He turns his hips into the pull instead of against it. He surrenders the leverage he does not have and takes the leverage the assailant has just given him. And with his right wrist, he rolls the weapon up and out. The red line rose cleanly and swung away east, and lay flat and harmless across the empty stonework of the gate pier and the open sky above it. And there it stays, said Captain Sallow, for the remainder of the incident. Frame 7, frame 9, frame 12, frame 19. I have examined every frame from the seizure to the recovery. From the moment the sentry's hips move, the muzzle trace does not cross a single living person, not the assailant, not the crowd, not the sentry himself. She turned and faced the bench squarely. In a forecourt containing 406 people, with a rifle in the hands of a man who was trying to take it, the muzzle of that weapon did not point at one human being for one frame. Nobody moved. He was not fighting for the rifle, she said. Anyone can fight for a rifle. He was flying the muzzle. The rifle came back as a consequence. Or rose. He was pale, but he was not finished, and I will give the man that much. Captain, this asterisk sequence you describe with such affection, this turning in, rolling out this lever on my client's thumb, it is very neat. It is very asterisk rehearsed asterisk. And I put it to you that it is precisely what one would expect of an individual who has been trained to a level of violence entirely inappropriate to a man standing outside a palace being asterisk laughed at. It is the 9 count, said Sallow. The what? The 9 count. It is the standard weapon retention drill for static ceremonial posts. It is taught to every guardsman in the kingdom of Eldermore in his first fortnight with a wooden rifle before he is ever permitted to carry a real one. She held up the slim green book. It is not a level of violence. It is Chapter 9, Every man on every gate in this realm has been taught to do exactly what Lance Corporal Crane did, in exactly that order. The performance standard is full recovery in under 2 seconds. And he took 1 second and 1/10, said Sallow. It is the fastest recorded execution of the drill outside a training hall. It is also the only recorded execution of it at all. In 19 years, no sentry of this corps has had to use it, until the 11th. Orr looked at the green book for a moment, and something came into his face. The honest bewilderment of a man who has just felt the floor move and cannot yet see where. And who, he said, wrote this remarkably convenient little manual? I have turned that question over a great many times since. It was not a bad question. In his place, on what he knew, I might have asked it myself. The Weapons Retention Working Group, said Captain Sallow. Name's Captain. The manual is not credited to an individual, at the author's request. The asterisk author's request, Orr repeated, and he turned to the room because he had scented something and he thought it was rot. So the drill which is offered to this tribunal as the sole justification for what was done to my client was written by a man whose name the Corps declines to give. Perhaps we might have it now. Perhaps he might even be in this building. And Ushult Pharaoh, without rising, without raising her voice, without the smallest flicker of anything at all, said, "He is Mr. Orr. He is sitting behind you." They called him on the Thursday morning, and the old Sessions house was so full that they opened the side aisles. He walked to the box the way he walked his beat. He gave his name and his number and his rank, Lance Corporal, which several people in that room plainly could not make fit into the shape of what they had just been told. And then he stood there with his hands at his sides and answered questions for 5 hours, and he never once said a word more than the question needed. Pharaoh took him through it in 20 minutes. Yes, he had served 19 years. Yes, for 2 of them he had been seconded to a working group following an incident at the Royal Infirmary in which a sentry had lost his weapon to a member of the public, and it had been recovered after 19 seconds by chance. Yes, he had designed the drill. Yes, he had taught it at the Corps School for 3 years afterwards. No, his name was not on it, at his own request. Yes, he had asked to be reduced in rank, and returned to a public post as an ordinary sentry. Why, said Pharaoh. The domed room hung on that. Because a drill written by a man who no longer stands a post is only a theory, said Idris Crane. Someone had to be the first man it was used on. It should have been me. And on the 11th of last month, at number 4 post, it was. Yes, ma'am. Lance Corporal, when Mr. Kine's hands closed on your weapon, what did you think? And Crane, for the first and only time in 4 days, took a moment before he answered. I thought about the crowd behind him, he said. There was a school party at the rail, 11 or 12 of them and 2 teachers at about 4 paces west. That is the direction he was pulling. You thought about that in 3/10 of a second. I didn't think about it in 3/10 of a second, ma'am. I thought about it every morning for 19 years. He looked at the bench, and he said it without heat, in the voice of a man reading a stock return, which is how that man says the only things he has ever cared about. That is what the drill is. It isn't a way to win a fight. It's a way to make sure that when the weapon comes back, it comes back without going through anyone on the way. Orr had him for 4 hours after lunch, and there was nothing there to get hold of. You cannot trap a man in a contradiction when he has not offered you a single ornament to trip on. Orr asked him if he had enjoyed it. Crane said no. Orr asked him if he had been angry. Crane said the question had not arisen. Orr asked him, at last, in a voice that had begun to lose its shape, whether he thought himself entitled to break a man's hand for a joke. His thumb was dislocated, said Crane. It was reduced the same afternoon. It was the least I could do to him and still get the rifle back. If I could have done it with less, I would have written the drill with less. Then Pharaoh rose to re-examine, and she said she had one further matter, and it would take 3 minutes. She called for the audio. Pelkine, the cousin, the small, quick man with the gimbal, had walked into a police station 11 days earlier with a hard drive and a solicitor, and a face the color of oatmeal. The police had come to him quietly 3 weeks before with a gate register, a forged pass, an empty gray van, and a list of 3 Crown properties. They had explained to him, without raising their voices, the difference in law between filming a fool and being paid to distract a guard while other men steal from the Crown, and they had told him what the second one carries, and they had given him a week to think about it, and he had thought about it for 4 days. He gave them the original file, uncut, 11 minutes of it with the sound on. And in the old Sessions House, on the Thursday afternoon, with 3 on the bench and 60 of the press and Princess Adela in the 3rd row, they played 8 seconds of it. You heard the wind on the microphone. You heard the fiddler. You heard 400 people at a palace on a nice morning. And you heard, from about a foot away from the lens, in a bright, cheerful, thoroughly sober voice, a man say, "Right, everybody watch, I'm going to take his gun." There was a sound in that hall then that I will hear until I die. It was not a gasp. It was the noise a room makes when a glass falls and does not break. Advocate Sylvain Orr sat down, without being told to. The tribunal reported 11 days later, and it took the bench 40 minutes to read it out, and I will give you the 2 sentences that mattered. The force used by Lance Corporal I. Crane at the North Gate on the 11th was necessary, proportionate, and, in the judgment of this tribunal, exemplary. Had he done anything other than what he did, had he pulled back, struck out, called for help, or discharged his weapon, this inquiry would in all probability have been convened to consider the deaths of members of the public. The civil claim was withdrawn that afternoon. Darrell Kine had rather larger things to think about by then. He was tried in the spring, in a criminal court, in a room without a screen. He pleaded not guilty and was convicted on all of it: attempting to disarm a sentry of the King's Guard, conspiracy to steal the property of the Crown, conspiracy to defraud the estate stores. Brogan Teal of Teal and Sons went down with him, and so did a stores clerk from Ashenford who had been selling the roster of delivery windows for 200 crowns a time. And between them, they accounted for the carriage lamps at Cardenholt, 4 gilt mirrors, a pair of candlesticks, and a case of old regimental colors from the Crown Archive that nobody had thought to look for, which has since been returned and hangs where it belongs. Kine got 6 years. He will serve 4. Nobody died, nobody was maimed, nobody was even much hurt. A thumb was put back in an afternoon, and the man who came over a chain rail at a soldier for the amusement of 11 million strangers is now in the 4th year of finding out what it costs. His cousin Pell gave evidence for the Crown and walked out with a suspended sentence, and a channel that had been shut down by then anyway, which is, I am told, the part he minded. The Green Book was reissued in the autumn. That was Princess Adela's doing, though she has never said so and never will. She came to Harrogate 3 weeks after the report, unannounced in the same grey coat, and she asked to be shown the 9 count, and I had a young guardsman named Pretty, the one who had dropped his rifle at the arms table, who had not dropped anything since, demonstrated on me with a wooden rifle on the armory flagstones. She watched it 4 times, then she said, "Show me the manual." I gave her the slim green book. She turned to the title page and looked for a while at the line that said asterisk prepared by the Weapons Retention Working Group, and she closed it and handed it back. "That will be corrected," she said. "The new edition has a name on the title page. It also has, printed below the contents on its own, on an otherwise empty page, a single sentence, which the author was asked to supply and which he supplied in 1 line and refused to add to. The weapon comes back without going through anyone on the way. There was talk of a medal. I know there was because I was asked in a roundabout way whether the Lance Corporal would accept one, And I said I would ask him, and I did ask him, and he said, "For what?" I did chapter 9 and went back to work. So they did not give him a medal. The king gave him something better, and I do not think it was an accident. King Alaric received him at the end of the season in the small audience room with no press and no cameras and 11 people present, of whom I was one, because Crane had asked for me, and it had, to my complete astonishment, been granted. The king is not a talkative man. He looked at Crane for some while. "They tell me," he said at last, "that you spent 2 years being knocked about by large men in an empty hall, so that a boy of 19 on a gate in the rain would know what to do with his hands. And that you then went and stood on the gate yourself for 19 years, in the rain, waiting to be the one it happened to." "Yes, sir." "Why did you not want your name on it?" And Idris Crane said, "Because a man's name on a drill makes it his, sir. I wanted it to be theirs." The king was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "It is theirs. That is why your name is going on it, so that they know what it cost and who paid." And he gave him back his sergeant's stripes, which Crane had thrown away 19 years before, and asked him what he wanted. Crane asked to go back to number 4 post. The king laughed, a short, surprised bark of a laugh, the only one anybody heard out of him that year, and said that he could not think of a single reason to refuse a man who had just declined a decoration, and granted it, and that was the end of it. I went out to the canal with him once more, before the season turned, and this time I was invited. Ewart Finn had watched the whole tribunal from his chair in his front room, all 4 days, on a small screen with his wife beside him. He had a copy of the new green book on the table when we came in, and it was already worn at the corners, and he had it open at the title page. He did not make a speech. Guardsmen do not. He looked at Crane for a long time, and then he said, 19 seconds. 1 1/10, said Crane. "I," said Ewart Finn, and his mouth went, and his wife put her hand on his shoulder, and he said, "So it could asterisk be done." All this time I thought, and then he stopped, and he did not finish it, and he never has, and he does not need to. We had tea. Crane fixed a wheel on the chair that had been catching. Nessa Finn sent us home with a cake in a paper parcel, which is a thing I have thought about since, that all those years the parcel had been going the other way too. He came back to the wall on the first Monday of the new season. I was at the arms table at 4 in the morning, with the tea going and the smell of oil and cold iron, and the file came down the 11 stone steps as it has come down them for 200 years, and I put a rifle into each pair of hands, and each man put his name on a line. He was 11th. He was always 11th. 3 chevrons on his sleeve now and the same closed door of a face, and he took the rifle and checked it in 3 movements: bolt, sights, sling, and there was that half-second, the one I had never been able to read, when he looked at me across the table. I know what it is now. I have known since the tribunal, and I have never told him that I know, because we are not that sort of men. It is the handover. It is the oldest thing in this building, and there is not a word in it. I put a loaded weapon into a man's hands and send him out into a crowd of 400 strangers who will laugh at him, and film him, and step over the chain, and one morning in 19 years put both hands on it and pull, and in that half-second at my table the 2 of us agree, without saying anything, that it will come back. That morning he took it and went up the steps into the dark, out to number 4 post, 30 paces of stone from the box to the gate pier and 30 paces back. At 6 the sun came over the east range, and the gates opened, and the world came in, the coaches, the school parties, the hawkers, the fiddler who plays badly, 400 bright little rectangles held up in the air. Some of them knew who he was by then. Most did not, and that is exactly as he wants it, and it is the whole of what he is. A man walking a worn track in a red coat, whom the crowd takes for furniture, and who has already decided 19 years ago in an empty hall, 10,000 grabs ago, exactly what he will do for them in a second and a tenth, without a shot, without a shout, and without their ever knowing they were in any danger at all. I watched him from my window until my tea went cold. Then I went back to my bench, and I laid out the next man's rifle, and I checked it, because in the morning there is always another file coming down the steps, and the whole of my trade is this: to be certain, when I put it into his hands, that he knows how to bring it home.